Chapter 21, A People's Constitution, 1972. The Big Picture. The 1972 Montana Constitution has been called one of the most beautiful, most progressive constitutions in the history of the United States. To this day, it remains a model of good government that other states and nations have followed. And it was written by everyday people, just like you. We, the people of Montana, grateful to God for the quiet beauty of our state, the grandeur of our mountains, the vastness of our rolling plains, and desiring to improve the quality of life, equality of opportunity, and to secure the blessings of liberty for this and future generations, do ordain and establish this Constitution. Preamble to the 1972 Constitution. Two young Montanans wrote those words late one night in a tiny room of the state capitol. They wrote and rewrote this paragraph, struggling to express their love of Montana, their hope for its future, and their faith in democracy. While they worked, the glow from their window lit the snow below. This statement, which is primarily the work of Montanans Bob Campbell and May Nan Ellingson, is the preamble introduction of the 1972 Montana State Constitution, a document that sets rules for government. It is a statement of gratitude, hope, and confidence in the Constitution that follows it. Yet at the time these two huddled over their scratch paper, the world outside their frosted window was turning upside down. A nation in transformation. The 1960s and 1970s brought many changes to the nation. Women, American Indians, and African Americans organized for more political power. The environmental movement celebrated the first Earth Day in 1970. A youth movement arose as young people searched for new ways to define the future. Issues like the Vietnam War and racism deeply divided the nation. African Americans in the South campaigned for civil rights. More people joined anti-Vietnam War protests. In 1970, National Guardsmen killed 4 university students in Ohio during an anti-war protest on campus. Then Americans discovered that the government had been secretly bombing Cambodia, a country next to Vietnam, and lying to the people about it. Many Americans distrusted government leaders and spoke out or protested for change, but there were many others who fought to hold fast to traditional methods and ideas. 2 shocking events in Montana. Montana was changing too, in big ways. By 1972, the state had transformed into a place that the writers of its 1889 Constitution never would have recognized. Women campaigned for equal rights and equal pay. American Indians joined together to claim more political power. A Mexican American won a seat in the state legislature for the first time. Then, in 1971, 2 shocking events happened. These 2 events made many Montanans think hard about their land and their future. The first involved the Anaconda Company. For years, the company had produced most of its copper and made most of its money at mines in Chile. But in 1971, the Chilean government took possession of Anaconda's biggest mine. Anaconda lost $357 million, equal to about $1.8 billion today, in 1 year. Faced with bankruptcy, it shut down mines and laid off thousands of Montanans. The second event happened the same year. The federal government released a report called the North Central Power Study. This federal study explored ways to fill the nation's growing need for energy. It recommended building 21 coal-fired electrical generating plants fed by numerous coal strip mines. It would have used half of the Yellowstone River's flow. Eastern Montana's grasslands would have become an industrialized landscape of strip mines and power plants. The idea of ruining Montana to fill the power needs of other states terrified and enraged many Montanans. As one group said, "We do not want to be the boiler room of the nation." Many Montanans who did not think of themselves as environmentalists reacted strongly against the North Central Power Study. Farmers, students, and others angered by the study formed grassroots
made up of ordinary citizens.
organizations. They held study meetings and met with legislators and members of Congress. They staged protests against the environmental degradation
damage
of their state. It was a whole new era, journalist Chuck Johnson said of this period. A new constitution for a new Montana. In this time of tumult and hopefulness, Montanans took a good look at their constitution. After nearly a century of domination by the Anaconda and Montana power companies, many people deeply distrusted big business, and government that supported business more than it did citizens. They wanted their state government to focus on the needs and rights of everyday people. As Governor Stan Stevens said later, people felt a determination, sometimes bordering on the reckless, to change the system. For 2 years in the late 1960s, legislative committees studied the 1889 Constitution and debated what to do about it. They found that the 1889 Constitution restricted many of the powers of state government. It limited when and how long the legislature,
the branch of government that passes laws,
could meet and what it could do. It allowed state leaders to make big decisions behind closed doors, without public input. No one even recorded legislators' votes, so the public never even knew how their representatives voted. Montanans felt helpless to protect their environment from big business and governmental policies. There were too many limits on how citizens could participate in their own government. Through the years, voters had approved 37 amendments,
changes,
to the Constitution that fixed some of these problems, but not all of them. Montana had outgrown its first constitution. Reapportionment opens the door to a new constitution. One big issue got in the way of creating a new constitution. Montana's 1889 constitution, like those of many other states, said that Montanans could elect one state senator per county. This meant that in the 1960s, the 864 residents of Petroleum County had the same number of votes in the legislature as the 79,016 people of Yellowstone County. By the 1960s, more than half of Montana's population lived in just 7 cities in central and western Montana. As the rural population shrank and the urban population grew, the urban citizens demanded equal representation. But the shrinking rural areas did not want to change the state constitution as long as their political power was at risk. In 1964, in a case called Reynolds v. Sims, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that state Senate districts had to be based on population instead of area. This way, each legislator would represent about the same number of people. Creating new legislative districts was called reapportionment, to apportion or distribute in a new way. After reapportionment, rural Montanans had less political power. As urban citizens clamored for a new constitution, rural voters found it hard to stop them. 1972, a People's Convention. In November 1971, voters went to the polls to elect 100 delegates,
representatives,
to the Constitutional Convention,
a meeting to write a constitution.
These delegates were remarkable for one striking reason: they were not professional politicians. A little-known restriction in the old Constitution prohibited anyone from holding 2 public offices at the same time, so no active legislators or political appointees could be Constitutional Convention delegates. As a result, the delegates were ordinary people from many walks of life. The press called them extraordinarily ordinary. On January 17, 1972, the convention's delegates gathered in the state capitol in Helena. They included 58 Democrats, 36 Republicans, and 6 independents. Among them were 20 farmers and ranchers, 24 lawyers, 17 business owners, 11 housewives, and 1 beekeeper. 4 were ministers or priests, 13 were educators, and 1 was a graduate student. The oldest was 73, the youngest was 24, and 19 were women. Most of the delegates had gone to college. Many had graduate degrees. They included 4th-generation Montanans and children of immigrants from Italy, Ireland, and Armenia. They were all white. There were no American Indians, Mexican Americans, African Americans, or Asian Americans elected. After the election, most of the delegates agreed that they had almost no idea how to write a new constitution. On the first day, Leo Graybill Jr. of Great Falls, president of the Constitutional Convention, stood before the delegates. He asked them to remember what life was like in Montana in 1900. There were no paved roads, no automobiles, and no telephone system. There was no radio or television. Most Montanans worked in the mines, on farms, or on ranches. They traveled by railroad or by horse-drawn wagon. Then he asked the delegates to try to imagine what life would be like 70 years into the future, in 2040. What would families be like? How might people travel? What kind of communications technology might there be? How would people spend their time? Do you really think things won't change as much in the next 70 years, he said? Then he charged the delegates with writing a constitution that would still be effective in future generations. This convention is a way for each of us, and for each of Montana's citizens, to concern ourselves with the general shape of the future, he said. We have that opportunity. Getting to work. The delegates sat in alphabetical order to minimize political differences and encourage cooperation. Usually, legislators sit grouped by political party and often vote as a group. But these delegates liked the mixed seating because it encouraged everyone to work together regardless of political party. Most of the time I had no idea if the person making a proposal was a Democrat or a Republican, said Delegate George Harper from Helena, who was elected as an independent. That's what I loved about it. The delegates worked together to write down the basic principles by which they hoped Montanans would govern themselves efficiently and fairly into the future. They worked for 56 days, often staying late into the night. They plowed through 2,300 pages of homework, studying constitutions from all over the world. They read more than 1,500 letters from Montanans suggesting things they wanted to see in their new constitution. They also welcomed public testimony. They broke out into committees to draft proposals, then debated them vigorously, and wrote them again, discussing every word. After 90 years of closed political meetings in Montana, the delegates insisted that all their meetings be open and all their votes recorded. As Delegate Bob Campbell reported, the spirit of openness was a breath of fresh air in the state's political process. What they wrote. The 1972 Constitution, just like the 1889 one, reflects the way its writers saw Montana and its future. Because 1972 was a very different time from 1889, the new Constitution was very different from the old one. First of all, it was half as long and much easier to read. Delegates took out parts of the old Constitution that caused problems. The new document streamlined state government to make it run more smoothly. Some major themes run throughout the 1972 Constitution. These themes reflect the ideas and concerns of Montanans in the 1970s, ensuring a strong, responsive government, guaranteeing the public's right to know about and be involved in government, improving education, protecting the environment, and guaranteeing equal rights to all. Another important theme, a theme found in no other state constitution at that time, was affirming the importance of American Indian cultures, and throughout, the document reflects Montanans' love of the land. The Declaration of Rights. The 1972 Constitution begins with a vigorous Declaration of Rights, 34 individual rights guaranteed to the citizens of Montana. It is similar to the U.S. Bill of Rights, but it adds some rights not even mentioned in the U.S. Constitution. It includes the right to personal privacy and the right to human dignity.
Every person's right to be treated with respect.
It also grants children the same fundamental rights as adults. And it guarantees equal rights to all, including the right to pursue a living and the right to education. The Declaration of Rights begins by stating that all political power belongs to the people. It affirms that the government and the military can never have power over the people themselves. A strong government to serve the people. Several articles of the new Constitution strengthened the executive and legislative branches of government and made them more accountable to the people. These articles ended some outdated rules, like one that said the legislature could meet for only 60 days every 2 years. And they provided for the legislature to exist as a body throughout its entire 2-year term, whether it was meeting or not. This made it easier for legislators to come together in special session if a problem arose. The Constitution gave the governor new powers, like the power to veto
Reject.
specific items out of the legislature's budget. It also removed some commissions and offices that made state government more confusing and less efficient. The Constitution also strengthened local and county governments. It gave citizens the right to organize and to power their local governments as they thought best. It also extended citizens' rights to pass and repeal
Cancel.
laws by initiative
A law passed by the people rather than by the legislature.
and by referendum,
When the people vote to reject a law passed by the legislature.
and the power to put proposed constitutional amendments on the ballot. From beginning to end, the Constitution affirmed that the purpose of government is to help the people and respond to their needs. Sunshine laws, the public's right to know. Say you vote to elect a legislator based on how he or she promises to vote on issues important to you. How do you know whether your legislator actually votes the way he or she promised? Section 9 of the Declaration of Rights guarantees the public's right to listen in while state leaders and officials debate, vote, or hold informational meetings about issues. These right-to-know statements are called the Sunshine Laws because they drew back the curtains of secrecy that had cloaked state government since its earliest years and let in the sunshine of public observation. Improving education. Article 10 guarantees every Montanan equal access to quality education. Montanans of the 1970s believed that education was essential to a person's development. They also believed that the educational system was responsible for cultivating the minds of students and developing their capacities for cultural and technological advancement of society. In other words, each one of you reading this chapter is expected to contribute to improving life in Montana in some way. And the Constitution says that your school is partly responsible for getting you ready to do that. It is left to each generation to figure out how the state can guarantee an equal education to everyone, whether they live in Alzada or Yak, on a reservation, in a city, or down a remote country road. Equal protection. Montanans were eager to establish equal rights for all citizens and to end discrimination against some people for their gender,
Whether a person is male or female.
race, religion, or political ideas. The Constitution affirms the dignity of every human being and guarantees that Montana laws protect all citizens equally. The U.S. Constitution protects U.S. citizens from discrimination by the government, but Montanans wanted their Constitution to go further and to prevent all discrimination, so the delegates included the following in Article 2, Section 4. Neither the state nor any person, firm, corporation, or institution shall discriminate against any person in the exercise of his or her civil or political rights on account of race, color, sex, gender, culture, social origin or condition, or political or religious ideas. This article was important, some called it revolutionary, for 2 reasons. First, it guaranteed equal rights to women. During this time, debates raged across the country over the Equal Rights Amendment, a proposed amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would grant equal rights to everyone regardless of gender. The Equal Rights Amendment created a tremendous amount of controversy. It has not passed to this day, but several states, including Montana, included equal rights language in their state constitutions in the 1970s. The second reason is that the article included the word culture. Delegates specifically guaranteed equal rights to American Indians and others whose cultures are different from mainstream
Majority.
society. Teaching and preserving our American Indian heritage. One day during the Constitutional Convention, 2 high school students from the Fort Peck Indian Reservation, Mavis Scott and Diana Loop, appeared at a public hearing. They asked the delegates to give all Indian students the opportunity to study their own culture, their heritage, and their own language in public schools. They also expressed hope that all students could recognize the importance of American Indians' heritage to the life of Montana. Two delegates in particular, Rick Shampoo and Dorothy Eck, championed Indian education in the Constitution. The result is found in Section 1.2 of Article 10. The state recognizes the distinct and unique cultural heritage of the American Indians and is committed in its educational goals to the preservation of their cultural integrity. This simple general statement challenges the state of Montana to teach and preserve its native cultures. Since then, American Indian and non-Indian teachers, leaders, and legislators have struggled to help fulfill the Constitution's promise. Protecting the environment. Article 9 of the Constitution states plainly, "The state and each person shall maintain and improve a clean and healthful environment in Montana for present and future generations." Further, it requires anyone who disturbs the land to take its natural resources, like trees or minerals, to
claim back or make useful again
the land. It affirms the importance of water to Montanans, and affirms that Montanans have a right to the beneficial use of water. Some of these provisions,
things that the Constitution provided for,
have started many controversies. What is the definition of a clean and healthful environment? How do you decide if we have one or not? How much disturbing of the land can you do before you have to reclaim it? What does a successful reclamation look like? The people have had to puzzle these questions out through the court system by filing lawsuits where they believed a constitutional provision was being violated. And that, according to Missoula delegate May Nan Ellingson, was exactly what the delegates intended. What did it mean to have a right to a clean and healthful environment? To me, it meant that the citizen had the right to go to court to protect that environment, she said later. A trust fund to benefit Montana. Article 9 also calls for Montana to identify and protect places that are special for cultural, historic, archaeological, scientific, or recreational reasons. To help fulfill this challenge, Montana created two special trust funds. One provides money to help fight noxious weeds in Montana. The other, called the Coal Severance Tax Trust Fund, is funded by taxes on coal mining. The state spends a portion of this fund on arts and culture programs to enrich life in Montana. During every legislative session, you will hear people debating about the Coal Severance Tax Trust Fund. The Constitution passes by a whisker. After 56 days of hard work, the delegates put down their pencils. Then all 100 of them answered a roll call and one by one went forward to sign the Constitution they had worked so hard to create. After debates, arguments, and even a few tears, they all came to agreement that they had written a useful Constitution. Every single delegate signed it, remembered George Harper of Helena. That was practically unheard of among all the states that were rewriting their constitutions at the time. As Delegate Wade Dahoud remembered, there was a very small minority who were opposed to some of the provisions, and we all waited, hoping, praying, that they would sign the final document. We all left our convention excited, with a great deal of pride and love and friendship for one another. Not everyone approved of the new Constitution. After the convention ended, some delegates criticized the Constitution and urged voters to reject it. The Montana Farm Bureau, the state's largest agricultural organization, led the campaign against it. Many farmers thought the new Constitution gave the state too much power and local governments not enough power. Other groups thought its environmental policies were too strict. One opposing group filed a lawsuit to stop the state from spending any of the remaining convention budget to educate voters about the new Constitution. So some delegates drove around at their own expense, held town meetings, and wrote articles for newspapers to help inform the voters what the new Constitution said and meant. May Nan Ellingson gave 56 talks at Missoula schools, banquets, and Grange halls, urging voters to approve the Constitution. Conservative Republican Betty Babcock often traveled around with liberal Democrat Dorothy Eck and Reverend George Harper, an independent, to answer questions about it. We appeared anywhere people would have us, Harper remembered later. My feeling, and many people felt this way, is that if it hadn't been for the help of strong Republicans like Betty Babcock and John Toole, that Constitution never would have passed. On June 6, 1972, the people of Montana voted to ratify,
formally approve,
the new Constitution. It nearly failed. 44 of 56 counties rejected it. But voters in the most populated counties did approve it, and the new constitution passed by 2,532 votes out of 230,000 cast. Montana's constitution is unique. Montana's 1972 constitution is unique in many ways. Other states in our region of the country, like North Dakota and Idaho, proposed new constitutions at the same time, but the voters rejected them. Of all the states in the Rocky Mountain West, only Montana has created and adopted an entirely new second constitution. And of all the states in the United States, only one has amended its constitution fewer times than Montana. Since 1972, other countries and states have used Montana's constitution as a model for their own. Some constitutional scholars have called it the most progressive constitution in the nation's history. What the Constitution has meant for Montana. Some historians call the 1972 Constitution a turning point in Montana history. In many ways, it painted a picture of a new Montana, a state concerned about its environment, about equal rights for all its people, and about strengthening government to improve society. Yet passing the Constitution did not automatically change anything. The legislature had to change the laws to comply with the Constitution, and in many cases, people had to organize to force some changes to happen. Laws changed to match the Constitution. Right away, the state legislature got busy updating laws to match what the new Constitution said. The 1973 legislature passed some important environmental bills to help protect Montana's clean and healthful environment. The Montana Water Use Act established water rights within the state. The Major Facilities Siting Act oversees the environmental impacts of power plants and transmission lines. The Montana Strip and Underground Mine Reclamation Act requires mining companies to restore the land to its original contours after mining. These laws have changed over time, but they still help protect Montana's environment for the people. A few years later, the legislature updated the Sunshine Laws. New versions of these laws guaranteed the people's right to attend meetings, read documents, and know what their government's employees are doing. Over time, the state caught up to other provisions of the new Constitution. To comply with the Constitution's guarantee of equal rights, the state created a Human Rights Bureau and an Equal Employment Opportunity Bureau. These are only a few examples of the changes that the Constitution brought to Montana. People had to fight for some changes. Some changes did not happen right away. For example, it took a long time to include American Indian history and culture in Montana's education system. The 1973 legislature passed a law called the Indian Studies Law. It required teachers on or near Montana's Indian reservations to study American Indian history and culture, so they would be able to teach about Montana's Indians in their classrooms. But many people disagreed over how to make the law work. A later legislature struck down that law and made Indian studies voluntary. Through the 1980s and 1990s, more Indian people served in the legislature and on advisory committees. They pushed harder for Indian education. In 1989, the state Supreme Court declared that schools must teach Indian history and culture. Still, the legislature failed to provide any funding for the program. In 1999, Carol Juneau, a Mandan Hidatsa legislator from the Blackfeet Reservation, pushed through the Indian Education for All Act, which requires Montana schools to teach about Indian cultures responsibly and respectfully. The legislature funded it in 2005. It took 33 years and many efforts to turn the Constitution's promise of Indian education into a reality. Today, Montana's Indian Education for All program is a model for other programs around the country. Courts interpret the Constitution. Sometimes people have to take issues to court to decide what the Constitution's provisions really mean. On these questions, the Montana Supreme Court gets the final say. For example, one statement in Article 9 requires the state to protect the environment from degradation and to make sure any lands disturbed to take natural resources are reclaimed. Does this mean the state must provide for cleanup after a natural resource has been polluted, or is the state responsible for preventing pollution in the first place? a key Montana Supreme Court decision came in 1999. The state government gave the 7-Up Pete gold mine a permit to dump water containing toxic levels of arsenic,
a trace metal that is poisonous in large concentrations,
into the Blackfoot River. 2 environmental groups sued the state, claiming that the state had violated its own constitution by allowing the pollution in the first place. The state responded that just requiring cleanup was enough. The Supreme Court sided with the environmental groups. Our Constitution does not require that dead fish float on the surface of our state's rivers and streams before its far-sighted environmental protections can be invoked,
called upon,
wrote Justice Terry Trewiler. This decision means that the state is responsible not only for fixing polluted areas, but for preventing pollution from happening. Some changes came in unexpected ways. The Constitution helped create some laws that even its writers could not have predicted. For example, Article 9 of the Constitution says that all waters within state boundaries are owned by the state for the use of the people. Yet in the 1980s, 2 landowners, one on the Dearborn River and one on the Beaverhead River, tried to prevent people from using the river when it passed through their land. A group of citizens joined together to take the issue to court. In 1984, the Montana Supreme Court ruled that the public has a right to use and enjoy any stream or river capable of recreational use, no matter who owns the land around it. The right to use that stream or river, however, does not include a right to cross private lands to get to it. In 1985, the legislature wrote this decision into law. The Stream Access Law gives all Montanans the right to float rivers and fish from riverbanks below the high water mark,
the mark on the riverbank below which the water has washed away most of the vegetation.
This law, a direct result of Article 9 of the Constitution, has been important to hundreds of thousands of Montanans who float, fish, guide, and sightsee along its rivers every year without having to pay or ask permission from every landowner along the way. Montanans will define their own future. 30 years after the Constitutional Convention of 1972, Anaconda delegate Wade Dahoud said he thought it was the most important political event of the 20th century. "I was part of it," he said. "I'm proud of it, and I'll always consider that the greatest 56 days of my careers as a lawyer and as a citizen of this state." The 100 delegates to the Constitutional Convention wanted Montanans of every generation to have a say in shaping state government. They instructed the state to ask the voters every 20 years if they want to hold a constitutional convention. In 1990, citizens voted on whether or not to call a new convention. They overwhelmingly answered no by 82%. The next vote will come up in 2010. Someday, a new generation of Montanans may draft a new constitution for Montana. Perhaps you will even help write it. How it worked. Why we have the Bob Marshall Wilderness. Bob Marshall liked to hike. When he came to Montana as a young man in the 1920s, he would go on 30-mile day hikes and 100-mile backpack trips. What he loved most was being able to go out for days without crossing a road or fence or running into a town. Bob Marshall was one of the first wilderness advocates,
supporters,
in Montana. Later, when he moved back east, he wrote a paper called The Problem of Wilderness to bring attention to the importance of wilderness to American culture. He defined wilderness as land where there is no motorized transportation and no humans living there permanently. At that time, many Americans saw the land as the supplier of water, food, timber, metals, minerals, and other natural resources. Not many people thought about the value of preserving wilderness for its own sake. But Marshall did. He and some other influential advocates of wilderness created the Wilderness Society, an organization that worked to preserve some of the nation's most beautiful, undeveloped landscapes. Wilderness is melting away, like some last snowbank on some south-facing mountainside during a hot afternoon in June, he wrote in Nature magazine. Marshall became chief of the Division of Recreation and Land for the U.S. Forest Service. In this position, he designated
selected and classified
5.4 million acres of American forest land as wilderness areas to be protected from development. Marshall had strong beliefs but a weak heart. He died in 1939 at age 38. A year later, the federal government created the 1 million acre Bob Marshall Wilderness Area in Montana. It was one of the first designated wilderness areas in the country. In 1964, Congress passed the Wilderness Act, which put wilderness areas like the Bob Marshall under permanent protection. Montana Senator Lee Metcalf
led
the effort. Later, the Lee Metcalf National Wildlife Refuge in the Bitterroot Valley was named after him. The Wilderness Act also allowed citizens to get involved in creating wilderness areas. In the late 1960s, a Lincoln hardware store owner named Cecil Garland decided that the dramatic landscape of Montana's Rocky Mountain Front Range should be designated as a wilderness area. He worked with the Wilderness Society to create the 240,000-acre Scapegoat Wilderness Area along the Continental Divide. In 1972, the same year as the Constitutional Convention, the Scapegoat became the first wilderness area created by citizens themselves. In 1978, the Great Bear Wilderness Area was established. Now the Great Bear, the Scapegoat, and the Bob Marshall are together considered the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. They include 1.5 million acres of land, 2,400 square miles, with no roads, fences, or permanent human habitation. A recent visitor called the Bob Marshall Wilderness Area God's greatest cathedral. Most Montanans just call it the Bob. The grandeur of the Bob, and of all Montana's wilderness areas, remains protected for everyone to enjoy on foot, horseback, canoe, or raft. Preserving Montana's natural landscape is one way citizens can make their world better for future generations.